Welcome to Motivated to Lead podcast, helping you become a better leader. I'm your host, Mark Klingsheim. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us for our podcast this week. My name is Mark Klingsheim with SEMA Partners. Each week, we interview leaders and they share lessons learned from their careers. Our goal is to help you become a better leader. This week, we're happy to have join us Doug Bruhnke. Doug is the CEO of Global Chamber, which operates in 195 countries and 525 metro areas. He has some great experience working internationally, and he's going to share some lessons learned from that experience, as well as other lessons that he's learned in his career. We're looking forward to today's conversation with Doug. Well, I guess first off, Doug, could you give us just a little bit of an overview of your career and a little bit of your story?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I'm from New York, German-Polish origin. My great grandparents on the Bruhnke side came over in 1888, and my maternal grandparents came over from Germany, in their case, in 1932, right before the war. I grew up very interested in sustainability and protecting the world, so I decided to get a technical degree that turned into a chemical engineering degree. And then I, of course, immediately got a job with the Dupont company, which you might say seems pretty hypocritical. However, I felt like there was something that I could do to, first of all, understand the situation with chemicals and other materials being made in the world, and then learn from all of that. Turned out along the way, I was in a management development process where I had to move every couple of years, and I jumped into the Teflon fluoropolymers business, and the guy for Asia retired, and nobody wanted his job because travel to that whole group of people seemed like something they didn't want to do. And I thought, wow, I want to do that. And finally, my manager, who was an Hispanic woman, and her boss, who was an African-American fellow, argued on my behalf that this young guy, 27 years old, can do this work and you should allow him to do it. In fact, they kind of forced the hand of the Asians who said there's no way in the world he's going to, be able to do this. And I did it. And I ended up living in Japan. I lived in Singapore. In the meantime, came back to the US and got my executive MBA from Michigan State. And I spent 35 years so far in international business. And so sustainability is still important to me. But what drives me on a daily basis is, how do we increase trade? How do we find ways for trade to occur anywhere in the world? Because if we're trading with people, we're speaking, usually in muted tones, in ways of understanding each other, negotiating, mediating, and all of that is good for the world.
So I ask this question to most every guest that we have on the podcast. With what you know now, what advice, if you're able to spin back time and talk to a 22-year-old Doug, what advice would you give him?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, that's probably would be a book, right? In terms of the numbers of things I tell myself. But I'd say first and foremost, the first thing that occurs to me there is seek therapy. and so everybody that I know is flawed, and I certainly was extremely flawed coming out of college. I was very fortunate to have met my wife in college. We actually were split when I graduated. I went out and did some things, and then came back to her, and we've been married, just had our 40th wedding anniversary, actually. Great. What I learned from my daughter was some of the things that I experienced as a child from my parents, which I committed to myself I would not transfer to her. I did, in a smaller form. However, it still was some of that trauma got carried over. And now that I'm actually, to complete the full story, my daughter pulled me into a therapy session with her therapist over the holidays. And I just kind of came to the realization that, wow, if I had done this when I was 22, I wouldn't have damaged her to the extent that I did. And I would have had a much more productive and better life and treated people in different ways, in probably better ways. And so I think of all of the things that that I would suggest for young people, I think they're more amenable to those kinds of things. I think my age folks think therapy is something wifty or not necessarily something even that they would talk about. I think it's really important that we do, especially what we've all been through these last 2 years, and the stresses and the strains that we've all had to endure. I'm very fortunate to have kind of fixed a lot of the stuff so far and still working probably until my last dying breath on stuff, so that I can become a more impactful person, help more people, and certainly through Global Chamber, change the world in more positive ways.
So talk a little bit about what the organization that you founded, and just kind of what you do as far as around the world. I think you're in 195 countries, but talk a little bit about the organization and kind of what your mission is.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that. As I mentioned, global has been really my passion. When I showed up a day early on my first international trip in January of 1987 to Seoul, South Korea, my head was spinning in such positive ways. It was a cold day, by the way. It's snowing and cold, but it didn't matter. What I was seeing was, transformational for me, that all of this existed, and I kind of knew it. But once I got exposed to it, then it was like, wow. Then through my work, I realized that people who do global business, are able to jump buildings, tall buildings, in fact, in a single bound and do some amazing things. I happen to be very lucky to be someone who thrives in being thrown into circumstances that I have no idea what the outcome will be. They're, with little preparation, with great surprises, finding a way to make that work. I think being an engineer, and particularly a chemical engineer, served me well because I ask a lot of questions and try to understand. I also, as a chemical engineer, see things in a process orientation. If we measure things here, what are the things we should be measuring, and how that all works, especially in business. And there's a very great analogy of that, I think, from designing a refinery so it doesn't blow up to doing a business so it doesn't blow up and, in fact, does some really good things. And so those are some of the things, certainly, that carried me all in those early days and kept me going and moving forward. But Global Chamber then subsequently evolved as I graduated from the workforce. I retired from the Dupont company. And as I worked with individual companies, I realized that, wow, at Dupont, I had resources all over and I really didn't need very much help, but almost everybody who's not in a multinational needs some help. And so why can't there be some organization, maybe a chamber of commerce, that was everywhere? That would be an amazing thing. And if I could find people that were better and smarter than me in every city around the world, that would be a phenomenal organization to be part of. Nobody was doing it. No one is still doing it except Global Chamber. And that's really what it is. 525 chapters around the world with people that are amazing, much more amazing than me, building into a network that helps exporters or investors anywhere in the world be more successful in a trusted community. And that's what we do every day.
So talk a little bit about some of the things that you've worked globally. You've had international assignments when you were your functional role, but now that you kind of have that overview as far as of different industry as well as different countries, what are some lessons that you've learned, and what do you think would be helpful for somebody that's a newer leader that's needing to understand, cultures as well as kind of ways that people operate in business differently around the world? Talk a little bit about that.
I see a lot of young people particularly through the Young Global Leader Program at Global Chamber. I feel that's a very important thing to get young people to be connected to those who have more experience. It took me 12 years in working at Dupont to get a mentor. And I remember walking home in Tokyo, passing people who were had come from the bath in their bathrobes and things like that. And I thought, wow, I'm not prepared for this. Nobody told me about this. And then I'd be thrown into situations at work that I was just kind of winging it. It doesn't need to be that way. What's also great about these days is that young people have the world in their hand through smartphones, where that telecommunications and technology facilitates not just communication, but I think a broader and bigger thinking than we did in our day. And so I think there's some real powerful connectivity that we can do between young people and those that are more experienced. So what we do on a daily basis at Global Chamber is connect members with clients primarily, but then also resources and others to move forward. One of the things that I see young people often struggling with is worrying that they haven't found the right job yet, or the job, right? The final job. And I would say my biggest advice there and kind of key learning is you kind of never find it. And one of the speakers, the IE University at Global Chamber, one of our members from Madrid, spoke about the 100-year life of individuals that's really transformed our thinking, or should, about lifelong learning. It used to be you learned in college, you worked at your job, you retired, and that was it. Nowadays, technology is changing, the markets are changing, we're living longer, we want to have a bigger impact, and so that puts more importance, I think, on education and making that a lifelong education process. It also, I think, creates the opportunity for people like me who don't want to retire and want to have an impact to continue making an impact, using the technology, using our education, and then using young people, using might not be the right word, but working with young people to have a bigger impact on the world. So don't worry so much about finding the thing. Juggle multiple things and recognize that in 10 years, everything's going to change anyway. So just keep evolving, keep learning, keep changing, keep trying to make an impact in the world. Do more than try, actually make an impact in the world. Just go out and do it.
So thinking about kind of how things have changed, even from the last couple of years, how things have changed and how that, we're operating differently virtually. Most people are still doing at least a combination of virtual work. Talk a little bit of just some of the trends you're seeing globally around work and working together.
It's funny that for me anyway, when I hear people like so much longing for getting back together again, which, by the way, is really important, right? We need to get back together and see each other and hug each other and do those kinds of things again. However, I would say for Global Chamber, one of the reasons why I started it was I was thinking, wow, people, like, if they're building business in Asia, they kind of go cold. They go multiple times and it takes them forever, and they spend all this money on hotels and travel and learning all the mistakes that they made. And it's like, why is that happening? So there's multiple pieces there that we try to solve at Global Chamber. One is, work with people who know the market. We just did an event on the Japanese market, like we do often, on Friday, and we have another one coming up in a few weeks. This one on Friday was about all the problems people have in building business there and what they shouldn't do, and then the things they should do. And certainly part of what they should do is connect up with people who know what they're doing, and that's our community. So that's a key part of everybody's daily activity, or should be, is connecting to people who know what they're doing, and move forward. But connecting doesn't need to be in person. If you're doing business in Tokyo, you don't need to go every day or every week or every month. You probably need to have something on the ground, a person on the ground, but you can do a lot virtually. And so Zoom has been a godsend to most of us. We were using Zoom prior to COVID, I think quite effectively, and then it really kind of through the roof. We did over 500 events last year, and we'll do over 600 events this year. And it allows us, as I was just right before this podcast, jumped onto the Global Chamber London meetup and was meeting people from all over the world, including our person in Myanmar who was Zooming into London, and I was here in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we were exchanging information about an event that's happening between the UK and Myanmar. So you can't do that in person, or the amount of work that you can do just in person is highly limited. And so the combination of doing virtual work with that in-person work is absolutely vital and critical to a productive and effective global expansion.
So I'm always curious of what books have influenced you and what you recommend to other leaders. Are there any things that you would put on somebody's reading list that you think would be helpful, and whether it's global issues or anything else that you think would be helpful?
Sure. No, I think you definitely keep reading, and I strongly recommend at least, every month, maybe more often, read books to open your mind and be aware of all the changes. The first book that really impacted me was by W. Edwards Deming, who was kind of the king, if you will, or the brainchild behind the Japanese production systems, including the Toyota production system, and then ultimately a lot of the quality changes in the U.S. industry driven in the automotive market. I spent a week with him in 1985, and at that time read his book, had a chance to spend an entire week, 40 hours with him, asking him questions. And that was right before I got the assignment for Japan. And actually, it was very well timed because he had already taught the Japanese or shared with the Japanese those philosophies. And so when I went to Japan, I think, and that plus being a chemical engineer and the process orientation of that allowed me to connect, particularly with the Japanese and then with other manufacturers around the world in terms of those philosophies. So that was a key thing for me. And then I would say another key book, that one is hard to find and probably not necessarily that interesting. I think The Goal, kind of in a related way, by Eli Goldratt, is an important and seminal piece on manufacturing. And that one's probably easier to find. And then finally, I would say the thing that really got me to say, wow, I am a global guy, was a book called Riding the Waves of Culture by Franz Trompenaars. And there are many other books that I've learned since then, because every time I mention that to the global tribe, they say, oh, yeah, but what about this and this and this? And so they're all books about intercultural. And what's really nifty about them, including the one by Franz Trompenaars, is he looks at these different cultural aspects and how people are different and gives you tools to measure on different spectrum scales of, Malaysians are different from Swiss people in these kinds of ways, and he's characterized them in a variety of different buckets. And that has been extremely helpful during my evolution throughout my career with the Dupont company. And then, of course, with Global Chamber, as over these last 7 years, as we've grown the chapters heading up to 525, there are many different cultural differences that you navigate every day. I started today in Kazakhstan. I went to India through some meetings. We had the Global Chamber London meetup. I'm doing the Global Chamber San Francisco Silicon Valley meetup in a couple hours. I'm meeting several different groups of people at Global Chamber Phoenix. We've got a Swiss meeting. We've got an Israel meeting tomorrow. So these are all, when you're jumping in, it's probably really good to know about cultural issues of not just technical things like what names do you call people, but how do you listen? And how do you, what you're hearing, what is it telling you about what they're actually saying? Yes, no, I need more, I'm confused, I don't like you, I like you, I want to work with you, I don't want to work with you. Those are not always explicitly spelled out in any culture. So it's really important to do in business to be aware of intercultural issues. It's critically important when you're doing it internationally.
So, what are some of the things that that people that are working globally? You mentioned learning how to listen. What people actually sometimes are sure what they say isn't always what they mean. But what are some ways that you get up to speed? You mentioned the book is a good resource, but talk a little bit about just some things that people are working cross-culturally might need to be aware of.
Sure. No, that's great. I think this global tribe that we've created has kept me sane, along with my therapist, these last several years, because there are many times, whether it's in politics or within nations, where people become too nationalistic and start to think of the foreigners as the bad people. And having been a foreigner in Japan, I know that feeling to some extent, and it's absolutely wrong. In fact, for the US, it's the main reason we are an innovative country. The half of Fortune 500 companies were founded by immigrants, and my whole family were immigrants, and most people's families were immigrants. And it doesn't matter what color they are, what religion they are, et cetera. So one of the great things about the Global Tribe and Global Chamber is it's full of people that just view the world as it is and people's skills as they are, without, at the same time appreciating the differences, like different food or different dress or different ways they behave, including cultural things, celebrating the differences, but recognizing that at the end of the day, we're actually really all the same. The dances we do, the food we eat, the clothes we wear, the religions we might have, could be different superficially, but fundamentally, we all want our children to have a better life than us and put a roof over our heads and make an impact in the world. And the Global Tribe gets that. And so I would say that has kept many of us sane and very happy to know that there are a group of people, millions of people around the world who understand that, who live that, along with professionalism and honesty and integrity being defined by living to what your word is. So even it doesn't mean people don't make mistakes. It just means when you make a mistake, you own up to it. And in that environment and in that world, that's a pleasurable way to do business. I've done business when I first retired at some small companies where I was helping family businesses. And I was honestly shocked at some of the things that I saw of people who had not been trained and had not kind of realized a life of dealing like I did with the Dupont company, which selected people, I think, a relatively narrow standard deviation of knowledgeable people that behaved a certain way. And I never saw, or very rarely saw, anything really radically weird in my life until I retired. And then I saw like people throwing stuff at each other and anger and weird stuff. And I think probably everybody can relate if you've seen like small businesses, especially family-owned businesses. That's odd. That's really weird. And what's good about the Global Tribe is that if you do that, you're not going to be successful on the global stage, really in any culture. And so that's a good thing. And it goes back to what I said about what we're doing and trying to change the world. And that is, global is good. And the more global there is, and the more of us that embrace it, the better the world is. And so if we continue to move and advance that with Global Chamber or our new initiative called Global is Good, Global is Good, which is just rolling out next week, actually. I encourage everybody to think about global in a new way and a different way and in an empowering way, not only for your own business, but to improve the world. Many times, global means outsourcing and lost jobs and foreigners, quote unquote, and bad stuff, when in fact, it's quite the opposite. It's challenges, but it's also great opportunities. 85% of the business in the world is outside the US, but only 1 in 100 companies exports. So 99% of US companies are going after 15% of the world's business, and only 1% is going after 85%. That tells me that there's a lot more opportunity for not just Americans and American businesses, but businesses all over the world.
So outside of work, when you're not in meetings, what do you do to recharge?
My family is critically important to me. I mentioned 40 years with my wife, and my daughter is having our first grandchild. She's an extraordinary nurse practitioner at Stanford Hospital in Palo Alto. Her husband is an executive with Tesla. And so those two, plus the baby coming in October, plus their dog, Gus, who we've is now 12 years old, has been my focus, and increasingly more and more, especially as I heal myself through the things I'm doing. I ride a bike. I used to be a golfer, and I love being outside and hiking as well. The bike has been very helpful for me to expand my thinking. It just kind of helps your mind, open a bit. And I have a book coming out called Global is Good, and it's being co-authored between myself and my business partner, Cesar Trabanco, probably a couple other people within the Global Tribe leadership team around the world will participate in that. But at least Cesar and I will be the authors of that, and that's coming out later this year.
Great. Well, look forward to picking up a copy. Any parting advice you would give to a newer up and coming leader?
Get a hold of yourself through your own therapy and your own healing, and be aware of all of that, and make sure that you've healed past your past. As I told my daughter, I said, hey, I've processed all that, and I did, but then now I'm processing it in a different way, and it feels a lot better. I highly recommend that. And I think, going back to the global side of things, be global. Get involved in global. It's very easy at Global Chamber to get involved because we're all, connected that way. But whatever business you're leading, or whatever business you want to lead, whether it's a startup or something that you're involved with, more opportunity exists outside the borders of your country, wherever you are, whether you're in the US or anywhere. Other countries realize that a little better than the US. We kind of fell asleep and thought, hey, we're just fine with our own market. We shouldn't be. Only 12% of the US GDP is exports, where Germany and Austria are over 50% of their GDP is exports. They know that exports drive growth and opportunity, and also balance out fluctuations in markets around the world. So get involved with international. Join us at Global Chamber. And whatever you do, do more international business, because you'll be happier, you'll profit from it, and you'll make the world a better place.
So how would somebody learn more about your organization, and how would they connect with you?
Thank you. Appreciate it. Globalchamber.org. It's easy to find. I hear a lot where people come to the website and say, hey, I saw the website, I'm not sure what you do. So think of it as a chamber of commerce that's everywhere. Every other chamber of commerce is one city. And for those of us that are involved with selling across cities and across borders, that feels very unsatisfying. Support your local chamber. You should do that. But if you're doing business across cities, like the original idea was San Diego, Phoenix, it's like, why isn't there a connection here? That fits really well with Global Chamber. If you're ready to do something internationally, really, it's the best place to go because of the resources, because of our large database to connect, and just that community that we talk about of people who are professional and ethical and want to help and very supportive. It's a different kind of environment than some of what we chatted about earlier. It just feels really good. And I think everybody that I know that's joined Global Chamber feels really good about that. And we're trying to make people feel good. So why not?
Great. Well, Doug, it's been a lot of fun talking to you today, and definitely encourage people to connect with your organization, and wish you continued success in all that you're doing.
Well, I appreciate that. I know we got connected through one of our members in another city, and he recommended me connect to you in another city. And so I think all of us know that, when we're doing business or when we're looking to evolve as our own our career, that connections mean a lot. Everybody should have a LinkedIn profile. Put the information you need in there, including a summary of what you're looking for going forward, and keep that updated. And hopefully develop more relationships like Mark, the one that we're just starting. So thank you for the opportunity to share more and also to learn.
Great. Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Motivated to Lead podcast. Please subscribe on iTunes. You can also see a video version of this interview at motivatedtolead.com. This podcast is brought to you by SEMA Partners, helping you find your next great leader.